Morning students. Today our topic of discussion is on hematinics and erythropoietin. So this comes under blood chapter. With this we will be completing our blood chapter. So what are hematinics? These are substances required in the formation of blood and they are used in the treatment of anemias. What are the important hematinics? Iron, vitamin B12 and folic acid. So whenever there is a deficiency of hematinics in the body, that leads to the development of anemias. So anemia can be defined as decrease in the total RBC mass in the body, which eventually decreases the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood, leading to pallor and fatigue. Always there is a balance between production and destruction of RBCs in the body. So whenever that balance is disturbed, that leads to anemia. So what are the different conditions that might lead to the disturbance in the balance? First one is blood loss. That could be acute or chronic. So acute is because of trauma or surgery. Chronic will be chronic gastrointestinal bleeding. Then due to impaired cell formation, due to deficiency of essential factors like iron, vitamin B12 and folic acid. Then bone marrow depression, that we can see as a side effect of anti-cancer drugs. Then erythropoietin deficiency, that is seen in chronic kidney disease where there is defect in the production of erythropoietin in the body that might lead to anemia. Then there is increased cell destruction as in hemolytic anemia. So let us discuss the hematinics one by one in detail. So first important hematinic is iron. The distribution of iron in the body. So on an average, an adult will be having 3.5 gram of total body iron content. In males, it is more, about 50 mg per kg, and in females, it is 38 mg per kg. Now let us see the structure of a hemoglobin molecule. See, in a hemoglobin molecule, we have 4 iron containing heme residues. So each gram of hemoglobin contains about 3.47 mg of iron. So when you know the amount of iron present in a gram of hemoglobin, it will be easy for you to calculate the amount of iron lost when a certain amount of blood is lost from the body. Say there is a loss of 100 ml of blood, then that produces a loss of 50 mg of elemental iron because 100 ml of blood contains 15 gram of hemoglobin. So since we know that each gram of hemoglobin contains 3.47 mg of iron, so you can calculate the amount of iron that is lost when there is a loss of 100 ml of blood. Then when you're giving iron to treat anemia, the rise in hemoglobin, to raise hemoglobin by 1 gram per dl, we should give 200 mg of elemental iron. Storage sites and daily requirement of iron. The most of the iron in the body, it is stored in the form of ferric form in combination with a large protein called apoferritin and results in the formation of ferritin. This is the storage form of iron in the body. The important storage sites are reticular endothelial cells, and apart from this, iron is also an important component of different cellular enzymes in the body. So even though the primary reflection of iron loss can be seen in blood, it eventually affects the other cells as well. If you see the daily requirement, adult males require about 0.5 to 1 mg or 13 microgram per kg. In adult females, it is 1 to 2 mg or 21 microgram per kg. Then in infants and children, the requirement will be more because it is the growing period and cells will be rapidly dividing. So the requirement of iron will be more. In infants, it is 60 microgram per kg, and in children, it is 25 microgram per kg. In pregnancy, there is an increased requirement again. So it will be 3 to 5 mg or 80 microgram per kg. Now let us see the intestinal absorption, transport, utilization and storage of iron in the body and as well as the excretion of iron in the body. So this is only one image, so we will discuss everything in this image. See, dietary iron, it starts with dietary iron. So and on an average, in the daily diet which we take, the amount of iron present will be 10 to 20 mg. So most of the dietary iron exists in the heme form or in the inorganic form. And this iron, though it is absorbed throughout the intestine, majority of it is absorbed in the upper part of the intestine. So now you see here that the heme form is absorbed through a heme carrier protein HCP into the mucosal cell. So this constitutes only a smaller fraction of the dietary iron. However, the major part is constituted by the inorganic form, that is the ferric form. See here, Fe+3 is converted to ferrous form, Fe+2, which is transported across the luminal membrane of the mucosal cell by a transporter called divalent metal transporter DMT1, and it enters the mucosal cell. So from here, okay, so what are the factors that are facilitating absorption? Acid, especially ascorbic acid and amino acids containing SH radical, they facilitate the absorption of iron into the cells because they favor the reduction of Fe+3 to Fe+2 form. Then what are the factors that impede iron absorption? They are like alkalis and phytates and phosphates. They impede the absorption of iron into the cell, or they decrease the reduction of Fe+3 to Fe+2 form. Then after being absorbed into the mucosal cell, the iron, the ferrous form of this, and the iron that comes from the heme, both these, they are transported across the basolateral membrane of the mucosal cell into the plasma through a transporter called ferroportin Fp1. Okay. So now there is something called mucosal cell block, because the mucosal cell, it prevents the excess absorption of iron into the body. So the iron that is absorbed in the mucosal cell is either utilized, absorbed and utilized, or it is stored in the form of ferritin in combination with apoferritin. So there is always a balance. Okay, so the iron that is stored in the form of ferritin is shed. That is the excess iron which is present in the body is shed when the cells are shed. That is what we call the ferritin curtain. So there is always a balance between the storage form and the ferritin form which is being shed off along with the cells. So that balance is explained by the balance of the iron status in the body and erythropoietic activity in the body. So these two, they decide the balance, whether it has to be stored, absorbed and utilized, or it has to be converted into the storage form. Okay. So then coming to the transport of iron in the plasma, if iron is in the free form, it is toxic. So here the Fe+2 in the plasma, it is oxidized to Fe+3, where the Fe+3 binds to a beta globulin called transferrin. So we have two Fe+3 molecules that are bound to the transferrin protein. So this Fe+3 circulates in the blood along with transferrin. Now the iron, it needs to get transported into the cells like erythrocyte precursor cells and the RE cells. So here what happens, the transferrin, it comes and binds to the transferrin receptor on the cells. So this complex now is engulfed by endocytosis, and the iron is released from that complex because of the acidic pH in the cell. So now next what happens, this transferrin receptor and the transferrin molecule, both are released to the surface to take in fresh loads. Now, the iron is stored in the cells such as RE cells, hepatocytes and myocytes in the form of ferritin and hemosiderin. So this is about the absorption, transport, utilization and storage of iron in the body. Now, what about excretion? How much amount of iron is excreted from the body daily? If you take in men, normally sufficient amount of iron present in the body. If you take males, the amount excreted is 0.5 to 1 mg daily. That occurs because of the shedding of the GI mucosal cells and also because of certain RBC which die, and also in the bile. In menstruating females, especially during menstruation, there is a loss of menstrual blood monthly. So the iron loss on an average in a month will be 0.5 to 1 mg per day. So preparations of iron, we have iron different preparations which can be taken orally as well as parenterally. Now first let us talk about the oral iron preparations. So oral iron, preferred route of iron administration is oral. Ferrous salts are inexpensive, have high iron content and better absorbed than ferric salts. Gastric irritation and constipation are related to the total quantity of elemental iron administered. So these are the main adverse effects which we see with oral iron therapy, and these are the limiting factors for oral iron therapy, and they are related to the total quantity of elemental iron that is administered. What are the oral iron preparations? The important oral iron preparations are ferrous sulfate, gluconate, fumarate, colloidal ferric hydroxide, and carbonyl iron. Apart from these, there are some new iron preparations that can be administered orally. They are ferrous succinate, iron choline citrate, iron calcium complex, ferric ammonium citrate, ferrous aminoate, ferric glycerophosphate, and ferric hydroxy polymaltose. See, all these, they can be absorbed well and their side effects are less because their iron content is less and they are more expensive. So whenever you want to give sustained release preparations are not preferred because they are expensive, and not only that, they are released mainly in the lower part of the intestine, whereas absorption of iron occurs mainly in the upper part of the intestine. And also their bioavailability is variable. The liquid formulations here, they may stain the teeth. So they have to be put at the back of the tongue and swallowed directly. The dosage is 200 mg elemental iron, which can be administered in 3 divided doses daily. Prophylactic doses 30 mg. Then time of administration here is the doctor's choice because iron is absorbed well on an empty stomach, but since the side effects are more by doing so, some of them prefer giving large amounts after meals or some prefer giving small amounts in between meals. See, adverse effects of oral iron, mainly we can see there are the gastric side effects like epigastric pain, heartburn, nausea, vomiting, bloating, colic, constipation, staining of teeth, and metallic taste. So all these are the adverse effects of oral iron therapy. So when is parenteral iron indicated? So oral iron is not tolerated. So bowel upset is too much. Then failure to absorb oral iron, as in malabsorption or inflammatory bowel disease. The non-compliance to iron therapy, that is the patient, he may not be taking the drug as you prescribed him to take. He is non-compliant. Then in the presence of severe deficiency with chronic bleeding. So whenever there is chronic bleeding, the requirement of iron is very high and it cannot be met by oral iron therapy. So you prefer giving parenteral iron therapy. Then along with erythropoietin in chronic kidney disease. So in chronic kidney disease, there is a deficiency of erythropoietin in the body. So when you supplement them with erythropoietin, the rate of erythropoiesis in the body increases. So that cannot be met by, again, oral iron therapy. So you need to supplement with parenteral iron. The formula for calculating iron requirement. See, whenever you want to give parenteral iron, so you have to calculate the dose of iron by using the patient's body weight. So different formulas are there. One formula is 4.4 into body weight in kg into hemoglobin deficit, that is hemoglobin deficit in gram per dl. Parenteral iron preparation. So in India, we have 4 important parenteral iron preparations. One is iron dextran, which is nearly almost 50 years old and which has been used commonly. Then recently ferrous sucrose and ferric carboxy maltose are used. So these have been introduced in recent years. And one more recent preparation is iron isomaltoside 1000. So all these newer preparations, they have an advantage of having lesser side effects and they have an increased ease of administration. So let us discuss one by one in detail. Iron dextran, this is a high molecular weight solution. It's a high molecular weight colloidal solution which contains 50 mg of elemental iron per ml. This can be given both IV and IM. In the injected muscle, 10 to 30% remains locally bound. So what you have to do, you should give a 25% extra dose. It should be added to the calculated dose. It is not excreted in urine or bile And anaphylactic reactions are common with iron dextran because iron dextran is antigenic in nature. And while you're injecting, if the person he complains of giddiness or there is tightness in the chest, you have to immediately stop administering the drug. And previously test dose were used before giving a main dose, but anaphylactic reactions can also be seen with test doses. So it is necessary to keep resuscitation facilities readily available whenever you're administering iron through IV route. So now if you have to administer it through IM route, then you prefer giving through Z-track technique. So that is, so all these steps have to be followed. So first identify the injection site, then pull the skin to one side, insert the needle deep IM. Then before injecting the medication, you have to withdraw and see whether any blood is coming, because you have to confirm whether the needle is placed in the muscle or in the blood vessel. Then you have to, if it is not in the blood vessel and it is in the muscle, then inject the medication, withdraw the needle, release the skin. Then the medication is prevented from oozing out because it is not a straight path. Now I'll show you another image. So what are the, how much dose you have to administer in IM route? 2 ml daily or on alternate days, or 5 ml each side or on the same day. Then IV 2 ml containing 100 mg iron. See, each ml of iron dextran contains 50 mg of elemental iron. So 2 ml will be containing 100 mg iron that is injected per day, taking 10 minutes for injection. The total calculated dose, or if you have to give by infusion route, the total calculated dose is diluted in 500 ml of glucose or saline solution and infused IV over 6 to 8 hours under constant observation. See, this is another image showing Z-track technique. See, place the needle perpendicular, pull the skin to one side, then inject the medication. So release the needle and release the skin. See, now you can see the point where this point in the skin where you have injected the drug, it has moved aside. So the medication has reached here in the muscle. And if you see the path, it is curved. It is not a straight path. So the drug will not ooze that much and there will be lesser staining of the skin. So you adopt this technique mainly to avoid staining of the skin, which is a most important adverse effect of parenteral iron treatment. Adverse effects are local pain at the site of IM injection, pigmentation of skin and sterile abscess, systemic fever, headache, joint pains, flushing, palpitation, chest pain, dyspnea, lymph node enlargement. See, anaphylactoid reaction is important because it is antigenic in nature, iron dextran. An anaphylactoid reaction resulting in vascular collapse and death occurs occasionally. Now coming to the other preparations, ferrous sucrose. It is a high molecular weight complex of iron hydroxide with sucrose. On IV injection, it reaches the RE cells where iron is dissociated and is utilized. Dose is 100 mg, can be injected IV over 5 minutes, once daily or once weekly. Hypersensitivity reactions are very low. So this is the advantage of newer preparations. They are less antigenic and other adverse effects are low as well. Particularly indicated for anemia in kidney disease patients. Oral iron should not be given concurrently and till 5 days after the last injection. See, this drug can also be not given through IM or SC route because it is alkaline in nature. Then ferric carboxymaltose. Ferric hydroxide core is stabilized by a carbohydrate shell here. This is taken up by the RE cells in the bone, liver and spleen. Dosages, it can be administered daily, 100 mg IV injection or up to 1000 mg diluted with 100 ml saline and infused IV taking 15 minutes or more. There is adverse effects are pain at the site, injection site and rashes have occurred, but anaphylaxis is rare. Again, anaphylaxis risk is less here. Headache, nausea, abdominal pain are mild. This is also not to be given in the IM or SC route. Then it is not recommended for children below 14 years of age because there is lack of data. Then the last one, iron isomaltoside 1000. Here this is the latest injectable iron formulation for IV use marketed in India in 2016. consists of iron bound tightly in a matrix of isomaltose 1000. It is also taken up by the RE cells and released slowly. So since this is tightly bound in a matrix, a high single dose of 1 to 2 gram IV can be administered over 10 to 15 minutes, or 100 to 200 mg IV may be injected over 5 minutes daily. Plasma T-half is 20 to 32 hours and only 1% is excreted in the urine. Then immunogenic potential is low and has been well tolerated in clinical trials. The uses of iron. First one is iron deficiency anemia. See, this is the most common indication for iron therapy. The deficiency can occur either because of nutritional deficiency or because of chronic bleeding from the GI tract, or after repeated attacks of malaria or any chronic inflammatory disease. So all these require iron therapy. So whenever you are starting iron therapy, it's usually given through oral route, but you prefer giving parenteral route only under special circumstances. And when you start treating with iron, how the hemoglobin level rises in the body. Initially, the rise is rapid, later the rise declines. So how much rise in hemoglobin is considered optimum? A rise in hemoglobin level by 0.5 to 1 gram per DL per week is an optimum response to iron therapy. However, it should be continued till normal hemoglobin level is attained. The next one is megaloblastic anemia. See, megaloblastic anemia occurs mainly because of deficiency of vitamin B12 or folic acid. So when you supplement them and the erythropoiesis is resumed, then if in case there is iron deficiency, then that is unmasked, then you would prefer giving iron supplementation in megaloblastic anemia. Then prophylaxis. So in later half of pregnancy, in infancy, all these are conditions where there is increased requirement. There is a chronic illness, then menorrhagia, then after acute blood loss. So in all these conditions, you have to give it prophylactically. Then it can be used as an astringent, ferric chloride. Acute iron poisoning. This is rare in adults. It's common in infants and children. When they consume up to 10 to 20 tablets, that amounts to 60 mg per kg iron. Symptoms are mainly, again, gastric symptoms we have: vomiting, abdominal pain, hematemesis, diarrhea. So because of all this, you can observe dehydration and acidosis. And obviously, there will be lethargy, weakness. Then there is cyanosis, convulsion, CVS collapse, and death. The pathological lesion here is hemorrhage and inflammation of gut, hepatic necrosis, and brain damage. Now, how do you treat it? So whenever you want to treat a poison, first you have to prevent the poison that is already present in the stomach. So prevent further absorption. So either you induce vomiting or gastric lavage with sodium bicarbonate to render the iron insoluble. Then also you can give egg yolk and milk orally. So these form a complex with iron. Inducing vomiting is not done with all poisons, but here you can do. The next is an antidote. See, desferoxamine. Iron is a heavy metal. So in a heavy metal poisoning, we prefer giving chelating agent. So here the chelating agent we prefer is desferoxamine. So what do? They form a stable water-soluble complex with iron, and that will facilitate easier excretion of iron from the body. The dose will be 0.5 to 1 gram IM repeated 4 to 12 hourly, or IV 10 to 15 mg per kg per hour, maximum up to 75 mg per day, till serum levels fall to less than 300 microgram per DL. Then what are the other alternatives? See, DTPA and calcium editate, these are also other chelating agents which may be used when desferoxamine is not available. The last is supportive treatment with fluid and electrolyte balance, then correction of acidosis, diazepam for convulsions, then respiration and BP also need to be maintained, or they need support. Vitamin B12, see, cyanocobalamin and hydroxycobalamin, these are complex cobalt containing compounds present in the diet, and they are referred to as vitamin B12. The physical properties here are: vitamin B12 occurs as red crystals and it is water soluble. It is synthesized in the nature only by microorganisms. The important sources are liver, kidney, sea fish, egg yolk, meat and cheese, and legumes are the only vegetable source. Then we have Streptomyces griseus, which is a commercial source. From this, we can develop streptomycin as well. Daily requirement is 1 to 3 microgram. Pregnancy and lactation need additional doses, that is 3 to 5 microgram per day. Metabolic functions. See, vitamin B12, metabolism of vitamin B12 is intricately linked with folic acid metabolism. The megaloblastic anemia can occur either because of vitamin B12 deficiency or because of folate deficiency, but that is quite indistinguishable. See, two active coenzyme forms of vitamin B12 are there in our body, deoxyadenosylcobalamin and methylcobalamin. So these two act as cofactors for two important enzymatic processes in the body. First one is methylcobalamin B12. It acts as a cofactor for methionine synthase and facilitates the conversion of homocysteine to methionine. So during this, simultaneously, there is conversion of methyl tetrahydrofolic acid to tetrahydrofolic acid. So here B12 acts as a catalyst. It accepts the methyl group and it donates the methyl group. See here the methionine that is formed, it serves as a formate donor and converts tetrahydrofolic acid to formal tetrahydrofolic acid, which serves as a precursor of folic acid, polyglutamate. The later is a cofactor in the synthesis of purines and pyrimidines. Later is here formyl tetrahydrofolic acid, which is a cofactor in the synthesis of purines and pyrimidines for DNA synthesis. Now what happens in B12 deficiency? Methyl tetrahydrofolic acid is trapped. That leads to decreased DNA synthesis and that results in megaloblastic anemia. The next enzymatic process in the body is deoxyadenosylcobalamin. It activates methylmalonyl-CoA mutase. So this enzyme, it converts toxic methylmalonyl-CoA to succinyl-CoA. So what happens again in B12 deficiency? Accumulation of methylmalonyl-CoA results in faulty fatty acid synthesis and their incorporation in the cell membranes of the CNS, leading to neurological damage. And that manifests as peripheral neuropathy, dementia, loss of motor and sensory reflexes. See, in this particular reaction or in this particular enzymatic activity in the body, there is no role of vitamin B12, whereas here vitamin B12 and folic acid both are related. Here there is no role of folic acid. What is the kinetics of vitamin B12? How is it absorbed, transported, and absorption? Present in the food as protein conjugates. It is released either by cooking or proteolysis in the stomach by gastric juice. Intrinsic factor here is released from the parietal cells. It forms a complex with vitamin B12, and this particular complex attaches to specific receptor in the mucosa from where it is absorbed by active transport. So now there are conditions where there is intrinsic factor deficiency. So then what happens? Deficiency of vitamin B12 develops because it cannot be absorbed. And this particular deficiency is more severe when compared to vitamin B12 deficiency that occurs because of nutritional deficiency. Then how is it transported in the blood? It is transported in combination with the beta globulin, transcobalamin 2. But when there is a congenital absence of transcobalamin 2, or there is an abnormal protein called transcobalamin 1 or transcobalamin 3 that is seen in liver disease and bone marrow disease, that leads to defective supply of vitamin B12 to tissues. So where it is stored? It is stored mostly in the liver. 4/5 of the body's vitamin B12 is stored in the liver. Degradation, it is not degraded in the body. It is excreted mainly in the bile, about 3 to 7 microgram per day. And from that again, 0.5 to 1 microgram is reabsorbed. It undergoes enterohepatic circulation. Then parenteral, completely absorbed through iron and SC administration. Traces are excreted in the urine. But when large pharmacological doses, more than 100 microgram are administered, almost all the dose is excreted because the plasma protein binding sites are saturated. So if you compare hydroxycobalamin and cyanocobalamin, these two are the preparations available for treatment. hydroxycobalamin is more tightly bound to the plasma protein, so it is preferred more than cyanocobalamin when parenteral injection is prescribed. Deficiency, it is seen mainly in Addisonian pernicious anemia. It is an autoimmune condition where there is deficiency of intrinsic factor, so absorption is impaired. Then other causes of gastric mucosal damage like chronic gastritis or gastric cancer. Then we have malabsorption, bowel resection and inflammatory bowel disease. Then consumption of vitamin B12 by abnormal flora in the intestine or by fish tapeworm. Nutritional deficiency, this is quite rare, and again in increased demand as in pregnancy, lactation or infancy. What are the manifestations? Megaloblastic anemia, glossitis, GIT disturbances, then neurological disturbances like subacute combined degeneration of the spinal cord, peripheral neuritis, then we have mental changes. All these are the manifestations of vitamin B12 deficiency. What are the preparations, uses and adverse effects? Cyanocobalamin and hydroxycobalamin are the available commercial preparations. Cyanocobalamin is available as 35 microgram per 5 ml liquid. Then hydroxycobalamin is available as 500 microgram or 1000 microgram injection. So if you consider these two, as I said, we prefer giving hydroxycobalamin because it is more tightly bound and it is more retained in the body. Then prophylactic dose is 3 to 10 microgram per day orally. Only when it is necessary, it has to be given. Then therapeutic dose. See, different regimens are there. So this first regimen is commonly followed in Britain. That is hydroxycobalamin 1 mg IM daily or on alternate days for 2 weeks, followed by 1 mg injected every 1 to 3 months for maintenance. Then this regimen is followed in US. Vitamin B12 100 to 1000 microgram IM daily or on alternate days for 1 to 2 weeks, followed by weekly injections for 6 months if neurological deficit is present, and then monthly for maintenance indefinitely. So what are the other uses? See, methylcobalamin, it is involved mainly in the synthesis of methionine and acetylmethionine. So these are necessary for maintaining the integrity of myelin. So we prefer giving methylcobalamin mainly in neuropathies. The dose is 0.5 to 1.5 mg per day. It has been promoted for correcting the neurological deficits in diabetics, alcoholics and other form of peripheral neuropathy. Then we can give mega doses of vitamin B12 in neuropathies, psychiatric disorders, cutaneous sarcoid and to allay fatigue. Then in tobacco amblyopia, so here the cyanide in tobacco, this causes visual field defects or it hinders the central vision. So here when you give hydroxycobalamin, it combines with the cyanide present in tobacco to form cyanocobalamin. Even large doses are safe and anaphylactoid reactions, they have occurred on IV injection route. Coming to folic acid, see here physical properties are, it occurs as yellow crystals which is insoluble in water, and chemically it is steroyl glutamic acid. Okay, it consists of pteridine plus para-aminobenzoic acid plus glutamic acid. Daily requirement is 0.2 mg per day, and in pregnancy and lactation the requirement is increased 0.8 mg. Kinetics, absorption. So folic acid is present in the food as polyglutamates. So the glutamate residues, they are split off in the upper intestine, and reduction to dihydrofolic acid and methylation also occur at the same site. Then how is it transported? It is transported in the blood as methyl tetrahydrofolic acid, which is partly bound to the plasma proteins. Storage. Tissues, they rapidly extract folic acid and store it as polyglutamates in the cells. So liver is the part which stores majority of folate in the body. So it takes up the major portion and it releases methyl tetrahydrofolic acid, which again undergoes enterohepatic circulation. So important point here is alcoholics, they have folate deficiency mainly because it interferes with the release of methyl tetrahydrofolic acid from the liver cells and it impairs the enterohepatic circulation. Then excretion, only traces are excreted, but when pharmacological doses are given, then 50 to 90% of it is excreted from the body. Metabolic functions. See here, conversion of homocysteine to methionine, we've already gone through this in vitamin B12. So there, both vitamin B12 and folic acid are involved in the conversion of homocysteine to methionine. So next are generation of thymidylate and conversion of serine to glycine. So these two are interlinked. So if you see here, serine, conversion of serine to glycine requires tetrahydrofolic acid, which is converted to methylene tetrahydrofolic acid. So here, this methylene tetrahydrofolic acid is utilized when deoxyuridylate is converted to thymidylate. So in this particular reaction, when deoxyuridylate is converted to thymidylate, the tetrahydrofolic acid is consumed. So this again has to be regenerated. So that comes from dihydrofolic acid. When dihydrofolate reductase acts on dihydrofolic acid, that generates tetrahydrofolic acid. Okay. Then purine synthesis. So for purine synthesis, for synthesis of the purine ring, it requires formyl tetrahydrofolic acid and methinyl tetrahydrofolic acid, both of which are derived from methylene tetrahydrofolic acid. Folic acid is again needed for histidine metabolism. Folic acid deficiency. So deficiency occurs because of inadequate dietary intake, then malabsorption like tropical sprue and ciliary sprue, then biliary, fistula, and chronic alcoholics. As I said, they impair the release of tetrahydrofolic acid from the liver cells and impair enterohepatic circulation. Then increased demand as in pregnancy, lactation, infancy. Then drug induced, see phenytoin, phenobarbital, these are anti-epileptics. So they interfere with the storage and utilization of folic acid. So they increase the requirement of folic acid. So whenever a person is taking anti-epileptic therapy, particularly with phenytoin and phenobarbital, you need to supplement folic acid. Then manifestations are megaloblastic anemia, epithelial damage, glossitis, enteritis, diarrhea, neural tube defects, spina bifida. If a pregnant lady is not taking folic acid, then the fetus might develop neural tube defects. Then general debility like weakness, weight loss, and sterility. Preparations, it is available as folic acid tablets and folinic acid injections. So uses are, see, megaloblastic anemia. This can occur because of nutritional deficiency. So when it is because of nutritional deficiency, supplement oral folate 2 to 5 mg per day. Then if deficiency is more, you can give parenteral 5 mg per day. Then in pregnancy there is increased demand, so you have to give. Pernicious anemia, it's mainly because of vitamin B12 deficiency. So when B12 is supplemented and there is hemopoiesis, it is induced, then folate deficiency may be unmasked. So here folate is only given as an adjuvant to vitamin B12. And most important point to remember here is folate should not be given alone when vitamin B12 deficiency is there, because whatever vitamin B12 is there, that is utilized for hemopoiesis and peripheral neuropathy might be developed, because vitamin B12 is also needed for maintaining the peripheral neuropathy develops because that they need vitamin B12 supplementation as well. So when vitamin B12 is diverted for hemopoiesis, so that leads to development of neuropathies. Then malabsorption syndromes, again tropical sprue, celiac sprue, there you need to supplement with folic acid. And again anti-epileptic therapy. So as I've said, when anti-epileptic therapy is being given with phenytoin and phenobarbital, you need to supplement folic acid. Then as a prophylactically we give in pregnancy, that is 1 mg per day. Or if a person is pregnant, then you start folic acid, or if they're planning to become pregnant, then also they can start taking folic acid even 3 months prior to when they're planning to do so. And one more is methotrexate toxicity. This is very, very important because methotrexate is an anti-cancer drug. This again will be dealt in detail in anti-cancer drugs chapter. But for here, methotrexate, it acts by inhibiting dihydrofolate reductase enzyme. So when it is doing so, not only the cancer cells, even the normal cells are affected. So in order to prevent that, you need to supplement folic acid. See, folinic acid. See here, folinic acid can be given, but not folic acid, because folinic acid does not require activation by dihydrofolate reductase enzyme. So it is the active form. So it directly overcomes the methotrexate toxicity. This folinic acid, it is taken up by the normal cells and they don't die. So if you give folic acid, what happens? Folic acid requires activation by dihydrofolate reductase enzyme. So since methotrexate is inhibiting the dihydrofolate reductase enzyme, folic acid is not useful if you give it in methotrexate toxicity. Then the next one is citrovorum rescue. So this is nothing but needs just an additional explanation to the previous point. That is, when a person is being treated with methotrexate for any particular cancer, then you should supplement with 1 to 3 mg of folinic acid IV within half to 1 hour of giving methotrexate. Because if you give after 3 hours, there will be no use and the normal cells, the healthy cells will die. Then to enhance the anti-cancer efficacy of 5-fluorouracil. Again, this will be dealt in the anti-cancer chapter, but for here, 5-fluorouracil, it acts by inhibiting the enzyme thiamidylate synthase. So for that, it requires tetrahydrofolic acid. So folinic acid should be given along with 5-fluorouracil when it is being used for anti-cancer therapy. The next is adverse effects. So it is non-toxic orally, sensitivity by injections, rarely. The last topic is erythropoietin. So erythropoietin is a sialoglycoprotein hormone in the body. It is produced mainly by the peritubular cells of the kidney, which is necessary for erythropoiesis. So that is why we see erythropoietin deficiency in chronic kidney disease, because it is produced mainly by the peritubular cells of the kidney. So whenever there is a state of anemia or hypoxia in the body, they stimulate the peritubular cells of kidney to secrete erythropoietin. So what does this erythropoietin do then? This acts on the erythroid marrow and it stimulates the proliferation of colony-forming cells of erythroid series, induces hemoglobin formation and erythroblast maturation, release of reticulocytes. So all these occur, okay, and anemia is treated, and also simultaneously hypoxia. Commercial preparation is epoetin alpha, epoetin beta. So this is a recombinant human erythropoietin. It is administered IV or SE and half-life is 6 to 10 hours. So where do you give it? Mainly in anemia of chronic renal failure. Dose is 25 to 100 units per kg, SE or IV 3 times a week. So this you should start giving only when the person is symptomatic and the hemoglobin level is less than 8 gram per DL. So now you have to start with the lowest dose and gradually titrate the dose upwards so that the hemoglobin is maintained between 10 to 11 gram per DL, because trials have shown that there is increased mortality when hemoglobin level is raised to the normal level, that is 13.5 gram per DL. Then this can also be used in anemia in AIDS patients treated with zidovudine. Then cancer chemotherapy induced anemia. So all these conditions you can use erythropoietin. So what are the adverse effects? It is non-immunogenic. Okay. If you see the adverse effects here, they're mainly because of the increased number of RBCs in the body. So erythropoietin is increasing the erythropoiesis. So the RBCs are increasing. So that leads to increase in the hematocrit, viscosity of the blood increases, so peripheral resistance increases, there is a hypertensive episode in the body, and there is increased clot formation in AV shunts. Then also seizure and flu-like symptoms can also occur. The last point is darbepoetin alpha. So this is a modified preparation of erythropoietin. It is a hyperglycosylated modified preparation of erythropoietin. that has a T half of 24 to 36 hours and it is longer acting. It is injected once weekly. Indications, efficacy and adverse effects are similar to Epoetin. Dose is 0.45 microgram per kg, SA or IV, once a week initially and later adjusted according to the rise in HB level. So this is in detail about the Hematinix, that is iron, vitamin B12 and folic acid and erythropoietin. So please go through the chapter once again, try to recollect everything what I have taught. So with this we will be completing blood chapter. Then the next will be chemotherapy. Thank you.